there is a very well-known old dispute whether Yitro came before the giving of the Torah or after the giving of the Torah. Even though we clearly see in the Torah that his story is written in the beginning of this week's Parsha, so obviously it would seem that if everything is in chronological order, Yitro came to Moshe just before the giving of the Torah, after Moshe already encamped near Har Sinai, and the Jewish people were waiting for Sinai revelation. That's when Yitro showed up. That would seem to be the logical conclusion. And in fact, that's what Ramban and certain other sages conclude. But many classical commentators, including Ibn Ezra and Rashbam, the grandson of Rashi, say that Yitro came after the giving of the Torah. And in fact, it's a big dispute already from the time of Talmudic sages. The Chazal, it's brought in the Gemara and in Mechilta on this week's Parsha. Some say Yitro came before the giving of the Torah, some say he came after the giving of the Torah. So the obvious question is, if in fact Yitro came later, why would Torah write about his coming before? Why would this Parsha start with the coming of Yitro? Why not mention his coming at the time when he actually came, after the Torah was given? So there are a number of answers, but the classical commentators give the following two answers. One possibility is that the Torah didn't want to interrupt the lists of commandments, so therefore after the so-called Aseret Advarim, as I mentioned in the previous video, it's not really 10 commandments, it's 10 sayings or 10 things, the 10 statements, the relation of the Torah that the Jewish people heard. After that, immediately the Torah follows with all kinds of other commandments. So therefore, in order to not to interrupt anywhere in those parshiot, the giving of the coming of Yitro is mentioned before. Okay, that's one explanation. That's the explanation of Rashbam. Another possibility is that the Torah actually wants to compare Yitro to Amalekites and to show the humongous difference. Of course, both the clan of Yitro and the clan of Amalekites lived as Bedouins, kind of mostly in southern parts south of Israel or towards Saudi Arabia, those areas, maybe somewhere towards where today is the Jordan, the country of Jordan. It's not exactly clear. They were apparently some of them at least were nomads and may have not lived in one place. But at any rate, both clans stem from similar places. In fact, Bilaam, in his blessings, also mentions them together. He first mentions the punishment of Amalekites in the future, and then mentions the great reward of Yitro. How did he happen to get that reward? So Yitro's clan became the allies of the Jews, Amalekites became the enemies of the Jews. So the contrast is the reason for this juxtaposition that there is, according to Ibn Ezra. That's why the Torah wants to mention these two together. Of course, today it's two different readings. It's two different weekly readings. One is at the end of Parshat B'Shalach, and one is in the beginning of Yitro. But the Torah is written all together. It's just later was divided into weekly chapters, and this is not the only division that existed. So basically, as you read the Torah, first you read about the coming of Amalek and how he wanted to destroy the Jewish people, and then you read about the coming of Yitro and how he wanted to cling to the Jewish people. And of course, the Yitro's descendants used to live among the Jewish people for the longest time. They were called Kini. They're mentioned a few times in Tanakh. And today the Druzes claim to be his descendants. Maybe other Bedouins are also his descendants. I have no idea. We don't have any opinion on the claim that Druze make. Maybe they are his descendants. But at any rate, it's a very interesting story how there is such a huge difference between more or less similar at the first hand. At least one would think that they're sort of similar, these Bedouin clans. But the paths that they chose for themselves are so drastically different. Now, of course, today we don't know who the descendants of Amalek are, and it's not even that important at this point to know physically who Amalekites are. But this idea that there are people who are just evil and who want just destruction, unfortunately, among a lot of liberals today, this is not accepted at all. They tend to think that just like they want good for everybody, so too everybody else must want exactly the same thing. They don't realize that not everybody is the same. For instance, the Nazis wanted something that was terrible. And I think on that pretty much everybody agrees today. Although there may have been, if for instance the Nazis would have won the war, Chas v'Shalom, then the history would have been written differently. The so-called Palestinians, the Arabs living in various places in the land of Israel, keep claiming that the fans, which is the Hitler and his group, they were generally very supportive of Hitler. That the reason they're so bad in the eyes of the people is because the Allies won the war. Had the Hitler won the war, who was pro-Arab, they worked together with Mufti of Yerushalayim, right, the Arab Mufti, then the history would have been written very differently. By the way, there is a film that now is winning all kinds of awards in Arab countries where some Arab or Palestinian or one of those, I mean, the people who call themselves Palestinians, that's basically a nation invented less than 100 years ago. It's the people who basically came to the land of Israel. A lot of them, most of them came within a couple of centuries, and even less. Many of them came already at the time it was under British mandate, which was about 100 years ago after World War I. But at any rate, this so-called Palestinian nation, in fact, those non-Jews who actually lived in Israel for quite a while are actually the Bedouins and the Druzes. It's the so-called Palestinians, ironically enough, that came latest to the scene. But maybe some of them, very small percentage, actually did live for a few centuries. But we know, of course, that the Arabs only conquered the land of Israel, just like all these other countries like Syria and Jordan and Iraq and all these other countries were conquered by the Arabs only after Islam. Before that, they lived in Saudi Arabia and nearby countries. That was where the Arabs are, Arabia. Only later they conquered certain other countries with their religion, with their language. There's not a single archaeologists never discovered a single statement written in Arabic language, let's say 1500 years ago in Israel. There was no such thing, of course, because there were no Arabs in Israel. And what is called Plishtim, if they want to say that the Palestinians are Plishtim were Greek people coming from the Isles and have absolutely nothing to do, not genetically, not culturally, not religiously, not language-wise, in any sense or form. They have nothing absolutely to do with today's Arabs who call themselves Palestinians. But at any rate, so in this movie that's winning all these awards, one of those Arabs or Palestinians or one of those people takes on a quest to find the descendants of Hitler's group, the Nazis, and resurrects them, and they work together to destroy Israel. Can you imagine that? That's what wins on the Arab street. That's a fantastic movie in their eyes, the coming back of Hitler. But at any rate, what happens in terms of the Western left, they would certainly not say we're pro-Hitler. Most of them wouldn't. But in practice, they're unfortunately the victims of the same type of propaganda as Hitler did. Let me give you an example. I was once watching an interview, and an Israeli spokesman complained to BBC that they're incredibly biased, which they are. And they said, well, Hamas or the Palestinians or whatever tell us the same thing, that you're biased pro-Israel. So to translate it into the language of World War II would say something like this. Imagine, for instance, a TV program that would first hear what, let's say, Americans or the British have to say about the war, and then would hear Goebbels' propaganda from Germany, from SS and Nazis, and then they would take together and balance, and of course each one would claim, right? The Americans would say you're unfair that you quote a lot of things from Hitler's propaganda, and Hitler's propaganda would say, well, you're unfair when you quote a lot of things from Americans. Now we know, of course, that there is a humongous difference between the propaganda of Goebbels and the American, which also had propaganda, by the way. It's not like everything America said was absolutely true and everything verified, but there is still a tremendous difference. Nobody would compare the two. But that's exactly what's happening right now. So if on the one hand there is Hamas with their outrageous demands and with their barbaric, absolutely inhuman desire to die and to kill and to be killed, unbelievable. What they do to their own people, I'm not even talking about the other people. This is a death cult of the worst type, much worse than Nazis. Unfortunately, the situation right now is that a vast majority of the so-called Palestinian people support Hamas and its methods, and those who don't support Hamas support even worse groups. Moreover, even the so-called Palestinian Authority, which is, by the way, completely unpopular, and if they have free election, they would never win. But even their methods just differ in the way that they would want to have maybe a temporary state, but later on to conquer everything. They also don't allow, in their opinion, also Jews don't deserve any kind of country. And this whole idea about the so-called Palestinian refugees, again, this is like an unbelievable thing where the Jews are again alone in a completely different situation than everybody else. There have been tens and tens of millions of refugees all over the place since that time. The Germans were kicked out of all kinds of places, which are now Poland, Czechia, Russia, Kaliningrad area, millions of people. The Koreans, Pakistanis, Indians, just recently Armenians, all kinds of places. I'm not even talking about what's going on in Africa, Sudan, all these places. All kinds of people are displaced, all kinds of people, and after a generation, they just, wherever they are, that's where they are, and that's where the descendants grow. Nobody considers and teaches them that they and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will have a right to come back to the country from which they, even if they were expelled, by the way. But in most cases, the majority of the so-called Palestinian refugees were not expelled. The majority of them left on their own. And in fact, at the time, the Arab leaders admitted it. There is on record plenty of statements of Arab leaders that they're the ones who did it. They told them to leave in order to destroy Israel. They were hoping to destroy Israel in the very beginning, and then the Arabs would come back. But Israel won the war, and then they put these people in camps, and generation after generation telling them that they're still refugees. There's no such law anywhere, in any sense. All the other refugees of the whole world there's less money spent on than just these so-called Palestinian refugees that keep growing. Just in Gaza alone, out of 100,000, there's 2 million now. 20 times they grew, screaming that they're not getting enough. They want everything. The point is that in Gaza, they actually lived better than most Arab countries, except the Gulf states. Most Arab countries live very poorly, actually. In Gaza, they lived much better before the 7th of October. But even that they weren't satisfied with. Israel is the one who pulled out of these territories and gave it to them. They could have had Singapore in there. But no, their religion says that you have to destroy Israel. You have to destroy the Jews. This is their religion. You cannot escape from it. Don't be foolish. Don't assume that, it's just propaganda. This is what radical Islam teaches. They have to conquer back every territory. In theory, Spain for them is also and many other places which used to be Muslim. But in practice, they are not able to conquer Spain, at least at this moment. Maybe they're hoping for the future, but at this moment they can't. Whereas Israel, they think they can. And that's why they keep doing it. And unfortunately, the UN participated in all that. And still participates. They teach children. Math exercises are about killing Jews. Everything is about killing Jews. It's unbelievable what's going on. There is evil in the world. We have to face it. It's very unfortunate. But Israel does not treat the entire population of Gaza as if they're all Hamas. They don't. Not even close. Like I said, if they did, there would be millions of people dead immediately. And certainly hundreds of thousands. The number of people dead after all of it, all of the long campaign, is so tiny, relatively speaking. Just recently, Saudi Arabia was bombing Yemen, and there were tens of times more people dead. And nobody said a word. Did you ever hear about it even? That Saudi Arabia was bombing Yemen? How many civilians were killed? Nobody even hears about it. Right now, there's humanitarian crisis in all kinds of places, in Africa, in various places, in all kinds of places. Not a single one of them interests anybody, because there's no Jews involved, of course. Jews are being singled out again. By the way, when October 7th happened, which was the worst atrocities in Holocaust, it was absolutely horrid. And the Gazans were all happy and participating in this. Those who didn't actually physically participate, they were just cheering, and it was their best day. They were having their great day. But what's interesting is there were demonstrations all over. Israel didn't even do anything yet. There were already demonstrations against Israel at that time. Everybody was so happy that they were able to do Holocaust to the Jews. Can you imagine? I mean, has the world gone completely nuts? What's going on here? And at the same time, the good sign is there are still people similar to Yitro and his descendants. Besides the Druzes that serve in the Israeli army, and are really like brothers to the Jews. They serve together, they work together, and they consider themselves part of the community. Moreover, the Bedouins also, for a large part, are together with the Jews. But there are even some Arabs who are serving in the Israeli army against the Gaza. So it clearly is not a war of Jews against Arabs or even Jews against Hamas. It's a war of Israel against Hamas. And it should be the war of the entire good world against Hamas. Hamas is totally evil. Hamas is definitely similar to Amalek. It doesn't matter if they physically come from Amalek. They definitely, spiritually, they are like Amalekites. There's no way out of this story. And on this I'll end today. And my hope and prayers is that true peace will come and a new generation of Arabs will grow up that will actually want to have peace with Israel.